At the altar he said, "I can't do this. I never loved you." In front of everyone. But what no one knew was the reason. And how 5 years later fate would put them face to face again. And finally the truth would break the silence that ruined her life. Before we dive into this story, subscribe for more emotional tales that don't just entertain. They remind us what it means to survive. Some women inherit pearls. Emily inherited sugar and strength. The morning sun poured through the windows of Mabel's Touch, a tiny cupcake shop tucked into a corner of Windsor Hill, Georgia. The scent of vanilla, cinnamon, and memories hung in the air like perfume. Emily Bennett stood behind the counter, hands dusted with flour, carefully icing a batch of rose petal cupcakes. Each swirl of frosting carried her grandmother's spirit, precise, graceful, and deeply rooted in love. To Emily, baking wasn't just a craft. It was survival stitched into batter and age. Locals adored her. Brides ordered months in advance. Influencers called her the cupcake whisperer. But none of that mattered more than the picture framed by the register. Emily and her grandma, arms wrapped tight, flour on their noses, pride in their eyes. It was Mabel who had taught her how to bake with her heart, and how to smile even when that heart was cracked open. And lately, even with a full order list, Emily's smile sometimes took effort. Not because she was unhappy, but because of what was me. One spring evening, everything changed. At a charity gala hosted by the city's elite, Emily had been hired to cater the dessert table. Dozens of executives, mayors, and families in polished pearls strolled by, sampling her creations. But it was one man, tall with sandy hair and the kind of blue eyes that looked like honesty, who stopped. He bit into a lavender cupcake and closed his eyes like it meant something. "This is magic," he whispered. And just like that, Emily noticed him. Really noticed him. His name was Andrew Caldwell, heir to Caldwell Hotels. The kind of man who wasn't supposed to notice girls with aprons and flour on their cheeks. But he came back the next day. And the next. He sat in the corner with coffee and her cupcakes, asking about recipes, about her past, about Mabel. Emily found herself laughing again, telling stories she thought she'd buried. With every visit, her walls melted like sugar in heat. By fall they were inseparable. Sunday mornings meant cinnamon rolls on the porch. Tuesday nights meant grocery store adventures and late-night baking trials. Emily couldn't believe someone like Andrew, wealthy, admired, from a family of polished surnames, could choose her with her simple life and sweet hands. But he did. And the night he proposed, kneeling with a cupcake in place of a ring box, she said yes with a heart so full it almost burst. But what she didn't see was the silence in Andrew's eyes. The one that came not from doubt, but from something he had never told her. Some recipes rise with love. Others collapse under secrets. The engagement became the story of the year in Windsor Hill. Headlines like "From Cupcakes to Castles" ran across local blogs and magazines. People adored the fairy tale, the small-town baker and the heir to a luxury hotel empire. Emily's bakery overflowed with congratulatory cards and pre-wedding cupcake orders. But beneath the icing and celebration, a strange coldness had begun to settle. Quiet, invisible, but real. Emily didn't want to believe it. Andrew was still present, kind, thoughtful, and supportive, but less spontaneous, less warm. He started coming late to dinner. Phone calls with his mother grew longer and ended in silence. When she asked if something was wrong, he'd smile and kiss her forehead. "Just work stuff, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." But her instinct, sharp as a chef's knife, whispered otherwise. Still, she continued to plan the wedding with heart and hands. Emily designed the entire dessert table herself. 6 cupcake flavors, each telling a piece of their story. The centerpiece would be lavender honey, the first flavor Andrew ever tasted from her oven. Mabel, frail but still full of light, helped her bake late into the night. "You're putting your soul in this," she said. "Just make sure he's doing the same." Emily nodded, though her chest tightened at the thought. At the rehearsal dinner, Andrew seemed miles away. He wore the same suit he had picked for their first anniversary, but none of the sparkle in his smile. His mother, seated across from Emily, gave polite compliments with cold eyes. "You've built quite a little following, haven't you?" she said, sipping wine. Emily forced a smile, unsure if it was praise or warning. Later that night, alone in her room, she stared at the ceiling, wondering why love, the kind that once felt effortless, was now filled with The night before the wedding, Emily baked the final test batch. The air smelled like vanilla and lavender, but her heart was restless. She decorated each cupcake with edible pearls. Mabel's idea. For elegance, her grandma said, holding her hand. And protection. Emily laughed, but deep down, she clung to the hope that everything would be okay. That whatever haunted Andrew's silence would dissolve with the vows. But she didn't know that some silences don't dissolve. They explode. Some heartbreaks aren't shouted, they're whispered in front of everyone. The morning of the wedding arrived softly over Windsor Hill. The sky was clear, the air warm, and the scent of lavender drifted from the cupcakes cooling on the bakery counter. Emily woke early, hands trembling but heart full. Mabel, dressed in pale blue, gently pinned up her hair and whispered, "You were born for this, sweetheart. He'll remember this moment for the rest of his life." Emily smiled. And she believed it. The Rosewood estate was stunning. Crystal chandeliers sparkled over golden drapes, and a white orchid aisle led to the altar. Socialites, influencers, and reporters filled the seats. Emily arrived at the grand doors in a delicate dress stitched with edible sugar flowers, a quiet masterpiece. She walked slowly, each step a mix of grace and vulnerability, as if every breath held the weight of her entire future. Andrew stood waiting. Sharp suit, perfect hair, but empty eyes. He didn't smile. Not even when she reached him. He kissed her forehead, rehearsed, distant. Cameras flashed. Guests applauded. But Emily felt the chill in his fingertips. And the silence behind his stare. The officiant began the ceremony. Emily reached for her handwritten vows, hands trembling with emotion. But before she could speak a word, Andrew let out a breath, gently released her hands, and looking straight at her but speaking to everyone, said, "I can't do this. I never loved you." Silence. Mabel rose to her feet. A glass shattered. Someone gasped. Emily stood frozen. For a moment she thought it was a joke. A mistake. But Andrew turned away. And walked back down the aisle. No goodbye. No explanation. Just a trail of whispers and disbelief left in his wake. She collapsed at the altar. In front of hundreds. Her makeup smeared, the cupcakes still fresh, and her heart, scorched like a forgotten tray left in the oven. She didn't cry on camera. She cried in the restroom. In the car. In her soul. And as night fell over Windsor Hill, Emily made herself a promise. Never again would she bake for someone who didn't understand the true taste of love. Some wounds don't bleed. They rise like smoke from something that burned too long. The headlines hit before midnight. Runaway groom. Hotel heir leaves bride at the altar. Her name was everywhere. A video clip of Andrew walking away while Emily stood trembling in front of the guests went viral within hours. Comment sections exploded with speculation, memes, and pity. But Emily didn't read any of it. She was in the back of her grandmother's car, her wedding dress crumpled in her lap, mascara streaked across her cheeks, eyes hollow. She hadn't said a word since it happened. Back at home, she sat on the kitchen floor where she used to knead dough. Mabel stood beside her, silent, her hand resting softly on Emily's shoulder. The bakery lights stayed off. The ovens remained cold. The shop that once smelled like cinnamon and buttercream now reeked of silence and shame. Emily's wedding cupcake sat untouched in the fridge, a sweet reminder of something that would never be tasted. "Let's get out of here," Mabel said finally. And Emily nodded. Because staying would only feed the next day she packed what little she could fit in 2 boxes. Mixing bowls. Piping tips. Her grandmother's worn recipe journal. And the cupcake tin she had used since age 12. Emily didn't leave a note. She didn't owe Windsor Hill anything. With her hair tied back, her eyes steeled, and her heart shattered, she left in the early morning. They drove north into the mountains, chasing somewhere quiet. Somewhere the internet wouldn't follow. They ended up in Brent Hollow, a sleepy town in the Blue Ridge Mountains. There were no reporters. No cameras. Just a main street with flower shops, a sleepy bookstore, and the smell of pine in the air. They found a small white cottage at the edge of town. It had creaky floors, mismatched furniture, and a tiny detached garage that smelled like wood and dust. It was perfect. Within a week, Emily turned that garage into her new workspace. She didn't call it a bakery. She didn't advertise. She painted a sign that simply read, "Whisper Cupcakes." The name felt right, quiet, healing, unseen. She started selling her cupcakes at the local farmer's market. No fancy packaging, no big announcements. Just simple sweets wrapped in parchment, flavored with pain and hope. She didn't smile much. But when she baked, she felt something close to peace. She avoided weddings, avoided people asking questions. But the work, the slow, silent art of turning grief into sugar, kept her breathing. Every cupcake was a step away from the altar. Every batch, a brick in the road back to herself. Some people write their pain in journals. Emily wrote hers in batter. Brent Hollow didn't ask questions. That's what Emily loved about it. She could walk to the market, sell her cupcakes, and no one cared about her past, only the way her lemon rose frosting melted in the mouth. Her booth at the Saturday market was small. A wooden crate, a chalkboard sign, and a line that never stopped growing. Children loved her rainbow sprinkles. Old men said her chocolate reminded them of wartime rations done right. People didn't know she was the viral bride. And she never told. Inside her converted garage, Emily hung white curtains, painted the shelves herself, and set up a vintage oven that Mabel found in a salvage yard. Every recipe she made came from memory, her grandmother's voice guiding her hands. But there was one batch she never made. Lavender honey. The one Andrew had loved. She couldn't touch it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That flavor had a wound stitched into it. And she wasn't ready to taste that again. She started teaching baking classes to neighborhood kids. $10 for 3 hours, and everyone left covered in flour and smiles. She didn't plan to teach, it just sort of happened. One day a girl asked how she made her buttercream so light, and the next 5 others wanted to know too. Soon her small workspace turned into a quiet refuge. For them. And for her. As they learned to whip egg whites and pipe roses, Emily remembered something. Joy could be quiet, and still real. Evenings were the hardest. After Mabel fell asleep in the next room, Emily would sit by the window with a notebook she never opened and a tea she never finished. The moon would rise over the trees and she'd wonder, where is he now? Does he think about it? Does he think about me? But she always stopped herself before going too far. Regret was a flavor she refused to taste again. One night she baked a cupcake she hadn't made since the wedding. Not lavender. But close. It was raspberry vanilla with sugared petals on top. As she held it in her hands, she whispered aloud, "You don't get to have this anymore." Then she ate it. Every bite a reclaiming. Every crumb a release. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't closure. But it was power. And she had earned it. She still didn't believe in love. Not yet. But for the first time in 5 years she believed in something else. In herself. The Brent Hollow Artisan Food and Design Festival was the town's biggest event of the year. Locals gathered to showcase their honey, quilts, pottery, and pies. Emily had no plans to attend until one of the event organizers, an old woman who bought her cupcakes every Sunday, practically begged her. "People need to taste your work," she said. Emily hesitated, then agreed. One weekend, one stand. Nothing more. He kept it simple. A small wooden table. A neutral linen cloth. Cupcakes lined up like tiny sculptures. Vanilla chai, blueberry crumble, and her newest creation, blood orange and thyme. No signage, no big logo, just her name handwritten on a craft paper tag. Whisper cupcakes. But the crowd came. The smell alone drew them in. Her table was one of the busiest within an hour. And that's when it happened. From across the rows of vendors, through a sea of people, she saw him. Andrew Caldwell. Hair a bit longer. Shoulders a little heavier. Wearing a tailored blazer and a badge clipped to his chest. Caldwell and Company, Director of Community Initiatives. Her stomach dropped. The air left her lungs. It was like watching a storm from behind glass. Silent but violent. He hadn't seen her yet. He was walking with a group of executives, pointing at booths, smiling politely. But when he turned and caught sight of her, everything stopped. His face changed. Guilt. Something close to awe. Emily stood frozen, clutching a cupcake box like it might save her. But it couldn't. Nothing could. She ducked behind her display and whispered to herself, "Not today. Not like this." Her hands shook as she packed her things, but she moved quickly. Efficiently. The way someone escapes a fire. But before she could leave, he was there. In front of her table, alone, eyes wide, voice low. "Emily, it's me. Please." She didn't let him finish. She didn't speak. She simply looked him in the eye, stone cold and certain, and said, "You don't get to say my name." Then she turned her back and walked away. But fate, cruel and calculated, wasn't finished yet. Emily didn't sleep that night. Her hands trembled long after the fair ended, and her heart pounded like it was trying to outrun something inside her chest. Seeing Andrew again had ripped open a wound she thought was stitched shut. Mabel noticed the silence. "Is it him?" she asked gently, setting down a cup of chamomile tea. Emily didn't answer. She just nodded once. That was all it took. Her grandmother sat beside her and said, "You don't owe him anything. Not even a word." But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. On Monday morning, Emily received an official email from the Brent Hollow Artisan Program, inviting her to join a pilot project between small-town vendors and national retail brands. It was a huge opportunity. Exposure, funding, mentorship. And she was on the list. So was Andrew's company, Caldwell and Company. Apparently they were leading the initiative. Emily almost declined. Almost. "I'm not doing it for him," she told herself. "I'm doing it for me." The kickoff meeting took place in a cozy conference room inside the town hall. She wore her soft gray cardigan and her confidence like armor. When Andrew walked in, their eyes met. He looked nervous, like someone walking barefoot across glass. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just sat at her table, notebook open, pen steady. And for the first time he looked small. Over the next few days, Andrew kept finding ways to talk to her. First it was, "Great presentation," then, "Your lemon cakes really stood out." Emily didn't respond. She kept things short, professional. But one afternoon, after a long logistics meeting, they both found themselves alone in the bakery kitchen they were assigned to share for a tasting event. He leaned against the counter, watching her frost a tray of mini cupcakes. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked. She didn't stop moving. "Every time someone bites into something I made and doesn't walk away," she said. The room went still. He cleared his throat. "Emily, I messed up. But I've changed. I want to talk." She finally looked at him. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't break. It was calm and razor sharp. "You said I wasn't enough. Now that I'm too much to ignore, you want a second chance." That shut him up. And Emily walked away, frosting in hand, fire in her chest, knowing the narrative was no longer his to write. The pilot program's final event was a joint presentation at a retreat in Colorado Springs, nestled between snow-capped mountains and pine-covered trails. Emily nearly declined again, but Mabel encouraged her. "If the past wants to chase you, make it run uphill." So Emily packed her mixing tools, her sharpest recipes, and her even sharper boundaries. She wasn't going to fall for words again, especially not his. The conference was all polished smiles and sustainability speeches. Emily stood out with her quiet strength and simple display, handwritten tags, compostable boxes, and flavors no one could forget. While others pitched with buzzwords, Emily let her cupcakes speak for themselves. Andrew, to no surprise, kept hovering. "I admire your independence," he said one afternoon. She looked him in the eye and answered, "You once mistook it for inconvenience." On the second night, after a full day of panels and tastings, Emily stepped onto the terrace outside the lodge for air. Snow had begun to fall lightly, dusting the wooden railings and fir branches. She didn't hear his footsteps, but she felt his presence. Andrew stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders tense. "Please," he said softly, "just give me 5 minutes." She didn't speak. But she didn't walk away either. He inhaled deeply. "The week of the wedding, my mother called a meeting. Said if I married you I'd lose everything. The board, the trust, the hotels. She said our brand couldn't handle someone small town, someone ordinary. She threatened to erase my name from the family legacy." He looked at her, eyes rimmed red. "I didn't choose her. I chose fear." Emily's face didn't change, but her hands clenched the wooden railing. "Instead of standing beside me, you destroyed me in front of the world," she said quietly. "You could have told me, but you let me bleed while you ran." Andrew took a step forward. "I know. I was a coward. But I never stopped loving you." She let out a breath, not quite a laugh but not disbelief either. "I baked my way out of the grave you left me in," she said. "I don't need your guilt to finish what I started." She turned to go but paused before opening the door. Her hand brushed the snow-covered handle. "Thank you for the truth," she said. but it doesn't change what I lived through. Alone. Andrew stood there as she walked back inside. And for the first time, he knew what it meant to lose someone for real. Months passed. Spring arrived like a quiet apology in Brent Hollow. Soft winds, cherry blossoms, the smell of wet earth and new beginnings. Emily's cupcakes had become a symbol in town, more than just desserts. They were small acts of resistance, of survival. A food blogger stumbled upon her booth one Saturday, and within weeks, Whisper Cupcakes was featured in a national artisan magazine. An invitation soon followed. A showcase in New York City, celebrating women in culinary arts. Emily said yes. She arrived with 2 crates of cupcakes and a fireproof heart. Her table was set with simplicity and grace. White linen, wildflower arrangements, and a sign that read "From scars to sugar." She spoke softly to visitors, told them about her grandmother, about her little garage in the mountains. But she never spoke of him. Not by name. Not even when she saw his. Because yes, Andrew was there. Invited as a speaker for a panel on ethical entrepreneurship. When he took the stage, Emily watched from the back of the room, arms folded. He didn't mention her. But his voice cracked when he talked about legacy, about choosing impact over image. He looked older. Not in years but in weight. And when he stepped off the stage, he didn't seek her out. Until the very end of the event. She was packing up her table, her hands wrapped around boxes when he walked over. No cameras. No entourage. Just him. "I just wanted to see you become everything they said you'd never be," he said. Emily looked at him, calm, grounded. "And I did it without you." They stood in silence, surrounded by the clatter of closing booths. She reached into one of her boxes, pulled out a single cupcake, red velvet, with cream cheese frosting and a sugar-dusted magnolia. She handed it to him. "This one isn't for nostalgia," she said. "It's for letting go." Andrew didn't cry, didn't beg. He just nodded, whispered thank you, and walked away slowly, holding the cupcake like it was something sacred. And Emily, she didn't watch him leave this time. She turned back to her table and kept packing. Because this time she wasn't losing anything. Back in Brent Hollow, spring gave way to early summer. The streets filled with sun hats, lemonade stands, and backyard laughter. Emily reopened the doors to her small bakery. This time not behind a quiet curtain in a garage, but on Main Street with glass windows and her name above the door. Brave Batter, the sign read. A new name. A new life. Not built to erase the past, but to honor the woman who rose from it. Customers came from nearby towns. Some from cities she had never visited. They didn't just want cupcakes. They wanted to meet the woman behind them. The one who turned silence into sweetness. The one who didn't just survive, but built something sacred from the ruins. Emily no longer flinched at the mention of weddings. He even made cakes for some. But she still had one rule. No lavender honey. That flavor remained hers. One afternoon, as the lights spilled across the front counter and the smell of cinnamon drifted through the air, a man entered quietly. Familiar. He didn't approach the counter right away. He just stood there looking around. Finally he stepped forward. "One cupcake please," he said. Emily raised her brow. "Which one?" He smiled gently. "Anything but lavender." He boxed it, handed it to him. No lingering. No questions. He placed a folded note beneath the bill, turned and left. She waited until the bell on the door stopped ringing. Then she opened it. Sometimes love doesn't mean winning someone back. Sometimes it means learning why you lost them. "If you ever want coffee, not closure, I'll be at Creek Cafe. Tuesdays. 9 a.m. She didn't reply. Didn't rush. The next Tuesday came. Then the next. And eventually, on a quiet morning with rain tapping the cafe windows, she walked in. They didn't talk about the wedding. Or the cupcakes. Or the pain. They talked about cities. About bread. About Mabel. Laughter came slow. Then easier. And somewhere between the second cup and a shared slice of lemon pie, Emily realized. The love she wanted was never about grand gestures. It was about being seen. As she was. As she had become. Whole. Fierce. And finally, free.